Hello my soccer universe, to another journey through Europe's top leagues outside of Serie A and the Austrian Bundesliga, who have their own dedicated review videos. It was a weekend very much dominated by El Clásico and O Clásico in Portugal. El Clásico was an absolutely mad 7-goal game with 4 goals being disallowed, even penalties being not given in the process as well. To me, it was almost too open. However, it was very entertaining. Barcelona, the most entertaining side this season. We don't need to talk about that. However, are they a great side? That's to be answered. 4 wins against Real Madrid have never been done before. But Real Madrid are really, really bad. And it's actually staggering that they were still in a title race ahead of El Clásico. But yeah, Barcelona had a little dip mid-season as well. Barca's crazy win, of course, more or less sealed their title in their favor, whereas it's all to play for in Portugal, as the Lisbon derby ended in a 1-1 draw, meaning the two teams are still level on points. However, slight advantage Sporting, who not only own the head-to-head, but also have a home game to finish out the season. Unbelievable, it's almost as tight in the Netherlands. Ajax had a huge lead just a few weeks ago. It's down to a single point. Ajax full-on collapse, and we might see one of the biggest collapses that we've seen in recent memory. Over in the Premier League, the top 5 race is also very much on. Really interesting. At least Forest have secured a return to Europe, but Champions League qualification seems unlikely. That might go to the big teams, but all to play for still there as well. In Germany, we know now the teams that get relegated, and Dortmund actually have a shot of making it into the Champions League. That seemed impossible not too long ago, but they have it more or less in their own hand. And finally, in France, the league that finished first on this weekend, we know now who will be the teams in the league phase of the Champions League already, and there were some pretty big results in the fight for the European spots as well. That's where we'll start. The penultimate round in Ligue 1 gave us some certainty regarding the Champions League spots. Key to that was Brest beating Lille at home 2-0, and then Marseille got an away win 3-1 at Le Havre. Although the scores were level for quite a while, and Mason Greenwood with a worldie put Marseille onto the road of the winner, and Leydon Guiri completes his brace for a 3-1 win. And Monaco also get the job done with goals by Minamino and Zakaria in the 60th and 69th minute to beat Lyon 2-0. Meaning that most likely Lyon will not end up in any European spots given their financial troubles. That might actually spell doom for them. And it was not only Lille that actually lost that are in the Champions League races. We also had Nice losing 2-0 at Stade Rennes. We then had Strasbourg suffering a shock defeat at Angers. And so all these teams sit now level on 57 points and will decide most likely who will go into the Champions League qualification, Europa League, and into the Conference League qualification. Lyon need a miracle to get in, honestly. We also had a pretty huge result on the bottom of the table with Saint-Étienne beating Reims 2-0 away from home, meaning Reims are not safe, and they also have a cup final to play. Don't forget that. And now Reims only sit 2 points ahead of safety and 3 points ahead of Saint-Étienne. Nantes level on points also, only getting a solitary point at Auxerre, might be threatened to get relegated. However, it's most likely Saint-Étienne will join Montpellier to go down to Ligue 2, and Le Havre will go into the relegation playoffs. And finally, Champions League finalist PSG got an easy 4-1 away win at Montpellier with Gonzalo Ramos scoring a hat-trick. Are we witnessing one of the biggest collapses in recent memory in the Eredivisie this season? Remember, just 3 weeks ago, Ajax had a comfortable 9-point lead on top of the table with just a handful of games to go, and then on Easter Sunday they lose to Utrecht 4-0. And suddenly all the momentum is gone. And this weekend, Ajax could have made a huge step towards the title because their eternal rivals Feyenoord had, after 10 minutes, a 2-0 lead over their chasers PSV through Peshao and Reed. And Feyenoord really looked very much the better team. However, whatever Bosch did at the halftime, it seemed to work. Perisic in the 50th minute pulls one back. Feyenoord defense could not clear that properly. And then he also assists Noah Lang in the 73rd minute to get the equalizer. In between, there was always some counterattacks where Feyenoord might have scored. However, they never got the job done. And then, of course, the momentum was with PSV. Reed is sent off in the 90th minute. There's a lengthy stoppage time where PSV actually thought they had already gotten the winning goal. However, it was disallowed for offside, and that was in the 93rd minute. At that moment, you really thought that Feyenoord might hang on to this point, but it is Noah Lang that gets the winning goal in the 99th minute, putting a lot of pressure on Ajax at that point. And initially Ajax were not too bothered by that. They were dominant against NEC, but they could not get the ball over the line. And then in the 59th minute, Hansen scores from a counter-attack, and just 8 minutes later, Pereira doubles up the lead, and then it's late on in the 82nd minute, a third goal for Nijmegen being scored. Absolute disaster for Ajax, who now sit only with a solitary point lead over PSV going into the final 2 games of the season. Unbelievable how they have lost all this momentum after getting so many narrow wins and big wins over PSV during the season already. Feyenoord meanwhile can console themselves that Utrecht also have lost, so Feyenoord are still in pole position to snatch the Champions League qualification spot. Utrecht managed to lose 2-0 at Twente, who are now in pole position to take the second Europa League spot. However, Twente is only a point ahead of AZ, who had also their wobble right around the cup final that they ended up losing to the go-ahead Eagles. This week they also get a win, a huge 3-0 home win over Groningen that also puts Groningen now outside of the Conference League playoff picture, where we find now Heerenveen and Sittard. Fulham may have had a relatively good season so far, however, as of late they have hit the skids, and on the past weekend they managed to lose 3-1 at home to Everton. Meanwhile, Brentford remain in pole position just in case Palace do not win the FA Cup to snatch this last Conference League spot, thanks to a 1-0 win at Ipswich. Meanwhile, City had a hard time breaking down Southampton and only managed a 0-0 draw, a huge setback in their claim for a potential Champions League spot. They are still in a relatively good position, however, it is less than they have expected, and for Southampton it was quite an achievement, as they will not be considered the worst team in the Premier League of all time. Meanwhile, Brighton keep up the pressure on Brentford with a 2-0 away win at Wolves, meaning they are level on points with Brentford. However, worse goal difference. Then on Saturday evening, Villa got a pretty big win, a 1-0 at Bournemouth, thanks to an Ollie Watkins goal just before the half-time break, meaning they more or less have their fate for Champions League qualification in their own. And in another battle between 2 top 5 candidates, Newcastle beat Chelsea 2-0 at home. However, that only tells half of the story. Sandro Tonali got Newcastle going very early on, scoring the 2nd minute. However, then Nico Jackson is sent off for an elbow and will probably miss for the rest of the season. But Chelsea made the right adjustments and were more or less the better team for large swaths of the game, and probably would have deserved more out of this one. However, Bruno Guimaraes in the 90th minute seals the deal for Newcastle, who still have a shot of finishing 2nd this season. Meanwhile, the 2 Europa League finalists continue their rotten form in the league. They're in the 2 places just above the relegation spots. It's unbelievable that those 2 idiotic teams play in the Europa League final. I'm still not over that. United managed to lose at home 2-0 against West Ham, whereas Eberechi Eze slays Spurs away from home as well. However, the biggest headlines on Sunday came out of the 2-2 draw between Forest and Leicester. Leicester had a 1-0 lead at Forest, thanks to Gibbs White and Wood, turned around. However, Buenanotte in the 81st minute got an equalizer. A win was crucial for Forest, who then had a little saga about a substitution that did not really work in their favor, and that actually then saw Marinakis a little bit annoyed walking onto the pitch, and those were all the headlines, although, you know, when you see it, there really wasn't all that much. And 2-2 was also the final scoreline in the top clash between Liverpool and Arsenal. It just didn't matter anymore. Liverpool enjoyed a 2-0 halftime lead thanks to 2 quick goals by Gakpo and Diaz in the 20th and the 21st minute. However, then Martinelli and Merino get the equalizer. Later on, Merino is even sent off for a 2nd yellow card. It's the 6th red card for Arsenal. Might be a reason why they are not in a title race anymore. However, then there's also the big story of Alexander-Arnold coming on in the 67th minute and being roundly booed by a large portion of the Anfield fan base, which is something that I neither understand nor condone. This was a player that really gave his all for this club, so let him go. On Friday evening, Hoffenheim salvaged themselves a 2-2 draw at Wolfsburg despite being twice down, meaning that point is probably enough for survival in the Bundesliga as they have a superior goal difference to Heidenheim. And then on Saturday in the afternoon it was all about the relegation battle. Bochum took on Mainz at home and lost 4-1, meaning their relegation was already sealed. And likewise for Kiel, who had to play against Freiburg, who are still battling for a Champions League spot, and despite having a 1-0 lead through Rosenbaum, Manzambi and Höhler turned the game around for Freiburg, and so Kiel also already down. And it also, thanks to Heidenheim getting a massive 3-0 away win at Union Berlin with Beck scoring a brace. That 3-0 win did wonders for the goal difference, but also put enough distance between them and the two relegated teams, and a shot of maybe even making it out of the relegation playoff spot. On the other side, Leipzig faced the all-too real possibility of missing out on Europe altogether. They managed only a 0-0 draw at Werder Bremen, who also squandered their last chance of making it into Europe and sit now behind Mainz. Level on points, however, goal difference is superior for Mainz and probably unsurmountable on the last match day. Then Saturday evening gave us a Bundesliga Classic, but most importantly the last home game for Thomas Müller in a Bayern Munich shirt, although they played in the new away jerseys, to the dismay of all the Bayern fans. Bayern got the home win, they already had sealed up the championship. The goals were scored by Harry Kane and Michael Olise, who had already assisted Harry Kane's opener. And then it was time to raise the trophy with captain Manuel Neuer handing it over to Thomas Müller to lift that one, and he duly then gave it to Harry Kane, that he finally also can do a trophy lift. He also needed some instructions by Thomas Müller on how to do that. It was a much more serious affair early on Sunday when Bayer Leverkusen hosted Dortmund in Xabi Alonso's last home game as a Leverkusen coach, potentially also Florian Wirtz's last game in a Bayer Leverkusen shirt at home. Leverkusen took the lead against Dortmund, however Dortmund was super efficient and despite having a much smaller XG, ran away 4-2 winners, scoring 4 through Brandt, Riersen, Adeyemi and Guirassy. And with that, Dortmund more or less have Champions League qualification in their own hands. And that's also due in part that Frankfurt cannot seal the Champions League spot thanks to a 2-2 draw at home against St. Pauli. They took a first-minute lead through Christensen, however St. Pauli by the 15th minute had turned it around. St. Pauli needed at least a point to almost secure survival. A win would have done that already. But Schwei equalizes them for Frankfurt. However, they created chances, never could break down St. Pauli. And so their Champions League fate actually hangs a little bit on a thread as they're facing the last game of the season, Freiburg away from home, where they potentially could afford a defeat. However, then Dortmund should not run up the score as they only have a 3-point cushion in the goal difference. No such worries though for Stuttgart, who move into the top half of the table, at least something after a rather so-and-so season, thanks to a 4-0 win over Augsburg, also helped by an early red card to Essende when it was already 1-0 for Stuttgart. For Stuttgart though, it's all about the cup final coming up in 2 weeks' time. The big story coming out of La Liga is probably the maddest Clásico that I have ever seen. I mean, 7 goals scored plus another 4 goals being disallowed in the process, but all of them more or less rightfully so. Maybe except for the last one where I could make an argument that it could have been allowed. There were also penalties given that were not given because of VAR. So very controversial overall, but no one is talking about the referees in this one, and that's also a good thing. Real Madrid had a 2-0 lead through 2 Kylian Mbappé goals. First one from a penalty spot, a very clear penalty, although I thought he might have been offside early on, but I think it was just alright. And then a nice counter-attack via Vini Jr. 14th minute, 2-0 Real Madrid, who needed this win to stay in the title race. However, Eric Garcia very soon thereafter pulls one back, and then it was a 26-minute spell where Barcelona were just irresistible. Lamine Yamal got the ball by Ferran Torres in 32nd, unleashes a shot to level the scores, and then Pedri finds just a few minutes later Rafinha on the left side, and it's 3-2 Barca, who again have overcome a 2-0 deficit. However, Mbappé seemingly had gotten the equalizer, but that was then given by offside, or was it a penalty? There was so much happening that I don't really recall, and Real Madrid were duly punished when Ferran Torres finds Rafinha to makes it 4-2 Barca, which more or less settled the game already. The early stages of the second half, it was more or less Barca controlling a game and probably should have pulled away a few more. But then Vini Jr. again finds Kylian Mbappé, the high line being exploited by Real Madrid, and it is 4-3. Kylian Mbappé on a hat-trick, the leading man in the Pichichi chart, and yet he still was on the losing side. But he was also on the losing side because Munoz came on and had a mega chance to make it 4-4 in the 88th minute. You knew at this moment that Real Madrid most likely will not get anything out of this Clásico. And Fermin Lopez then even made it 5-3. Wild celebrations. However, there was a handball in the build-up. Honestly, I didn't feel quite right. It was a new situation as well. I mean, he has the ball, touches with the hand, and he loses the ball. He gains the ball again. So it's a new phase of play, I could argue. On the outside, when I saw it, I thought, it's probably going to be taken away. And, you know, I guess referee Hernandez wanted to avoid being called out by the Madrid media. So it's only a 4-3 to Barca. Barca complete and never before seen quadruple over Real Madrid in a single season and have now a 7-point lead atop of the table. So they can already clinch in midweek against city rivals Espanyol. Naturally, most of the other games in La Liga took a backseat, but there were some interesting results. For instance, Rayo winning in Gran Canaria 1-0 through a Garcia goal, meaning Rayo remain in the Conference League spot. We might see a European games in Vallecas being played, whereas Las Palmas really look now more or less down and out. Unbelievably, Valencia, who were at the beginning of the year in the relegation zone in serious relegation trouble, now move into the top half of the table thanks to an easy 3-0 win over Bordelas's Getafe. Bordelas, of course, has been a Valencia coach not too long ago. All 3 goals coming already in the first half. Meanwhile, the other troubled club in Spain is Sevilla, who lose 3-2 at Celta. Celta looking at the Europa League at the moment, getting a 3-2 home win. And then Sevilla fans are being stopped and held at the training ground because of angry fans. Everything behind the scenes at Sevilla is an absolute mess. Financially, the club is in serious trouble, and that's why the fans are not happy. Do you need to threaten the players? I don't think so. And thanks to a late Etta Young goal, Villarreal stay very much in a driver's seat to secure the last Champions League spot out of La Liga, but also keep Girona dangerously dangling above the relegation zone. Mallorca seems to be the toughest opponent for Rayo for this last European spot. They get a 2-1 win over last place Valladolid. Alexander Zurl scores 4 goals in the first half against his former team Real Sociedad, more or less securing Atleti 3rd place in the league with a slight chance of even catching their city rivals. Leganés, meanwhile, got a pretty big 3-2 home win over Espanyol, meaning an Espanyol who scored only 2 goals late on in the game when it was already decided, are still not quite out of relegation trouble, but it gives also Leganés a shot of survival as they sit now only 1 point behind Alaves. An Alaves team who lost 1-0 Athletic Club getting a little bit of the negative emotions from Old Trafford off their back. The winning goal came through an own goal. Athletic Club have also Champions League qualification more or less secured. And it's also in part to Betis dropping points at home. Yes, they've reached a European final and they might make it into the Europa League this way. However, Champions League was definitely in there. Cuti Hernandez gave Betis the lead. However, Budimir just 10 minutes later finds an equalizer for Osasuna, and so Betis are now 3 points behind Villarreal. Let's save best for last, which is of course this incredible title fight between Benfica and Sporting. They had a head-to-head meeting on Saturday evening. It ended in a 1-1 draw. That means everything is still level going into the last round. However, Sporting hold a head-to-head if the 2 teams finish level on points. And Sporting actually could have sealed the title already with a win, whereas Benfica needed to have a win by 2 goals to seal the title in that one. Sporting took a very early through Trincao in the 4th minute. That then forced Benfica to go all out, and Benfica created plenty of chances. However, it was Sporting that scored a 2nd goal that was somewhat controversially disallowed. But overall, it felt like Sporting can hold on. However, in the second half, there was even more attacking moves by Benfica, who got the equalizer after a really great Pavlidis run, almost Lamine Yamal-like, then finding Aktukolu, and it's 1-1 in the 63rd minute. Everyone cheering on Benfica to get the win. However, they cannot find the winner, and the game then descended a little bit into madness also. It got then very techy, I would say. At the final whistle though, I saw a lot of smiling faces more on the Sporting side and even shake hands, which I thought was very curious. But with that, it's all to play for. And the opponents of both of these teams on the last match, they also have something to play for. Sporting will face at home, and that's probably to their advantage, Vitoria, who now need a win because their rivals for the Conference League spot, Santa Clara, won 2-1 at home against Famalicão, while Vitoria somehow managed to lose at home to Farense 2-1. Farense even missed a penalty in the process, but got the winning goal through Poveda in the 92nd minute. Benfica, meanwhile, have to go to Braga, and Braga find themselves also in a precarious position. 4th place is secure, but 3rd place would be better because that would get you directly into the league phase of the Europa League. However, they managed to lose despite a 1-0 lead at Casa Pia. And so, Porto put themselves very much into pole position for the fixed Europa League spot thanks to a 2-1 away win in the derby against Boavista, a result that also relegated Boavista. I have to be honest, while all the headlines were for El Clásico, which was really a great game, as I said, more open, to me, the title race in Portugal is so riveting. It is so tight, and add to it that those two title rivals will also meet in the cup final just adds a little bit more spice. This was really the best part of the entire week, and I'm really looking forward to the last match day in Liga Portugal. However, there's plenty of other stuff going on as well. Will Dortmund complete the miracle in the Bundesliga and snatch a Champions League spot, or will it be Freiburg and Frankfurt who kind of sort of just get over the line? Dortmund way would be to mess this one up. In the Premier League, who will finish in the top 5? In France, we still have to decide who will go into the final 3 European spots and also for relegation. And of course in the Netherlands, will Ajax get the title over the line, or will it be PSV? It really looks like PSV. Questions over questions, please let me know your thoughts in the comments below on these. Give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video, subscribe to my channel if you want to see more videos like these, and I will talk to you soon about more things in my soccer universe. Bye! Hey there, I really hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, here are some videos and playlists that you may enjoy too. Also, please consider subscribing to my channel and hit the little bell icon so you get notified whenever something happens in my soccer universe. And with that, have a wonderful day. Bye!